The rain-slicked streets of Seattle glistened under the sodium glow of streetlights, each puddle a mirror to the city's restless heart. Ezra stood frozen, his breath catching as the stranger's hand grazed his, a fleeting warmth in the cold night. He didn't know how one fleeting glance at a crowded bar had led to this moment. But here they were, teetering on the edge of something irreversible. Ezra, 24, had never been good at reading people. Growing up in a small town outside Tacoma, he'd learned to keep his head down, his heart guarded. Being gay in a place where whispers carried like wildfire meant survival demanded silence. He'd moved to Seattle 2 years ago, chasing freedom, but found himself lost in a city too big, too loud, too indifferent. Tonight, though, something shifted. The bar neon pulse. A gritty dive in Capitol Hill had been alive with laughter and clinking glasses. Ezra had gone alone, nursing a cheap beer, when he saw him. Caleb, 26, was impossible to miss. His blonde hair caught the bar's dim lights like a halo, but his eyes sharp, green, and searching held a story Ezra couldn't read. He wore a flannel shirt rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms etched with faint scars, a map of a life Ezra wanted to trace. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment, the noise faded. Caleb's smile was small, almost shy, but it carried a weight that pinned Ezra to his seat. "You look like you're waiting for something," Caleb had said, sliding onto the stool next to him. His voice was low, warm, like a fire on a winter night. Ezra fumbled his response, his usual defenses crumbling under Caleb's steady gaze. They talked for hours about music, about dreams, about the way Seattle's rain felt like absolution. Caleb was a graphic designer, a transplant from Chicago, with a laugh that made Ezra's chest ache. As the bar closed, Caleb offered to walk him home. Ezra's apartment was only a few blocks away, but the walk stretched into eternity. They dodged puddles, shared stories, and laughed at nothing. The city seemed to hold its breath, watching them. By the time they reached Ezra's door, the air was thick with unspoken questions. Caleb's hand brushed Ezra's as they paused, and the touch sent a jolt through him. "Do you ever feel like you're running out of time?" Caleb asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ezra's heart stuttered. He wanted to say yes, to confess the loneliness that clung to him like damp clothes, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he nodded, and Caleb's eyes softened. They stood there, inches apart, the world narrowing to the space between them. Ezra's pulse thundered as Caleb leaned closer, his breath warm against Ezra's cheek. "I don't want to say goodbye," Caleb murmured. And they didn't. Not yet. But the night wasn't just a beginning, it was a collision. Ezra didn't know it then, but Caleb carried secrets heavier than his own. Secrets that would unravel them both, forcing them to confront who they were, who they could be, and what they were willing to risk for love. The next morning, Ezra woke to the memory of Caleb's voice, the ghost of his touch. His apartment felt emptier, the silence louder. He checked his Finino messages. Doubt crept in, sharp and familiar. Had he misread everything? Was Caleb just another fleeting moment, like so many before? But then, a knock at the door. Ezra opened it to find a small, folded note slipped under the threshold. In neat handwriting, it read, "Meet me at the pier tonight. 8 p.m. See." Ezra's heart raced. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew he'd go. He had to. The pier was alive with the hum of the city street performers, the scent of fried food, the distant cry of gulls. Ezra arrived early, his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, scanning the crowd. When Caleb appeared, his flannel swapped for a navy sweater. Ezra's breath caught. Caleb's smile was hesitant, like he was carrying a weight he hadn't shared. "You came," Caleb said, relief flickering in his eyes. "Of course," Ezra replied, his voice steadier than he felt. They walked along the pier, the Ferris wheel glowing against the night sky. Caleb's shoulder brushed Ezra's, and the contact felt like a promise. They talked about everything and nothing, favorite books, worst fears, the way the city felt like a puzzle they were both trying to solve. But there was something guarded in Caleb's voice, a hesitation that hadn't been there the night before. Ezra noticed it when Caleb's gaze drifted to the water, his jaw tightening. "You okay?" Ezra asked, his voice soft. Caleb hesitated, then nodded. "Just a lot on my mind." He didn't elaborate, and Ezra didn't push. Not yet. They ended the night at a small coffee shop, tucked into a corner booth. Caleb's fingers traced patterns on the table, and Ezra watched, mesmerized. "I haven't done this in a long time," Caleb admitted, his voice barely audible over the hum of the espresso machine. "Let someone in." Ezra's chest tightened. "Me neither," he said. "But I want to." Caleb's eyes met his, and for a moment, the world fell away. Then Caleb reached across the table, his hand covering Ezra's. The touch was electric, grounding, terrifying. Ezra didn't pull away. The days that followed were a blur of stolen moments. Ezra and Caleb fell into a rhythm text that lit up Ezra's phone at odd hours. Late-night walks through Seattle's misty streets, and quiet evenings in dive bars where their knees touched under the table. Each moment felt like a brushstroke on a canvas neither of them fully understood yet. But beneath the warmth, Ezra sensed a current of unease in Caleb, a shadow that flickered in his eyes when he thought Ezra wasn't looking. Ezra worked as a barista at a small cafe in Fremont, pouring lattes and dodging questions about his life from nosy coworkers. His days were predictable, but Caleb was a variable he couldn't solve. One night, as they sat on a park bench overlooking Lake Union, Caleb's silence stretched too long. Ezra nudged him. "You're quiet tonight. What's going on?" Caleb's gaze stayed fixed on the water, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "It's nothing," he said, but his voice was strained. Ezra didn't believe him, but he let it go, trusting Caleb would open up when he was ready. Instead, Caleb turned to him, his smile soft but fleeting. "Tell me something about you. Something no one else knows." Ezra hesitated. He wasn't used to being seen. Not like this. "When I was a kid," he began, "I used to hide in the attic with a flashlight, reading books I stole from the library. I'd pretend I was someone else. Somewhere else. Anywhere but there." His voice cracked, and he looked away, embarrassed. Caleb's hand found his, squeezing gently. "I'd have liked that kid," he said. "He sounds brave." Ezra's throat tightened. Brave wasn't a word he'd ever used for himself. But with Caleb, he felt it might be possible. Their connection deepened, but so did the questions. Caleb avoided talking about his past, deflecting with humor or changing the subject. Ezra noticed other things too, the way Caleb tensed when his phone buzzed, the way he'd glance over his shoulder in crowded places. One night, as they walked through Pioneer Square, Caleb froze mid-sentence. His eyes locked on a man across the street. The man, tall and broad-shouldered, stared back for a moment before turning away. Caleb's grip on Ezra's hand tightened, then released. "Who was that?" Ezra asked, his stomach twisting. "No one," Caleb said too quickly. "Just someone I used to know." Ezra wanted to push, but the fear in Caleb's eyes stopped him. Instead, he pulled Caleb closer, their shoulders brushing as they walked on. The city's pulse seemed to match Ezra's own fast, unsteady, alive. The next week, Caleb invited Ezra to his apartment for the first time. It was a small, cluttered space in Belltown, filled with sketchbooks and half-finished canvases. Ezra ran his fingers over a drawing of a stormy sea, the lines raw and chaotic. "You're good," he said, glancing at Caleb. Caleb shrugged, but his cheeks flushed. It's just a hobby. Helps me think. He moved closer, his hand resting on Ezra's shoulder. The air between them crackled, and Ezra's breath hitched as Caleb leaned in, their lips meeting in a kiss that was equal parts tender and desperate. It was their first, and it felt like a dam breaking. But the moment was shattered by a sharp knock at the door. Caleb pulled back, his face pale. "Stay here," he whispered, crossing the room. Ezra's heart pounded as he heard muffled voices a man's, low and urgent. When Caleb returned, his jaw was tight, his eyes distant. "Everything okay?" Ezra asked, his voice barely steady. Caleb nodded, but the lie was obvious. "Just a neighbor. Nothing to worry about." Ezra didn't believe him, but he stayed, curling up next to Caleb on the couch. They watched a movie, but Caleb's arm around him felt tense, like he was holding on too tightly. As Ezra drifted to sleep, he wondered what Caleb was running from and whether he'd ever let Ezra in far enough to find out. The next morning, Ezra woke to find Caleb gone. A note on the counter: "Had to run an errand. Back soon." See? The apartment felt too quiet, and Ezra's unease grew. He wandered to Caleb's desk, where a sketchbook lay open. The page showed a portrait of Ezra, his eyes soft and unguarded. Beneath it, in Caleb's neat handwriting, were the words, "I don't deserve this." Ezra's heart sank. He didn't know what Caleb meant, but the words felt like a warning. Ezra couldn't shake the note's weight. "I don't deserve this." The words looped in his mind as he walked home, the Seattle drizzle soaking his jacket. He wanted to trust Caleb, to believe in the warmth of their stolen moments. But doubt was a familiar shadow, and it clung to him now. Caleb texted later that day, apologizing for leaving without explanation. "Work stuff," he wrote. "Can I see you tonight?" Ezra stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the screen. He typed "sure," but felt the distance growing between them, a crack he couldn't bridge alone. They met at a diner near Caleb's apartment, the kind of place with sticky tables and coffee that tasted like regret. Caleb looked tired, his eyes shadowed, but he smiled when he saw Ezra. "You're here," he said, like it was a miracle. "Always," Ezra replied, trying to keep his voice light. But as they sat, Caleb's phone buzzed again, and he silenced it with a quick, nervous motion. Ezra's patience frayed. "Caleb, what's going on? You're hiding something." Caleb's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Ezra thought he'd shut down again. But then Caleb sighed, his shoulders slumping. "It's complicated," he said. "My family, they're not like yours." Ezra frowned. He hadn't told Caleb much about his own family, but the comparison stung. "What do you mean?" Caleb's eyes darted to the window, then back to Ezra. "My dad, he's not a good guy. I left Chicago to get away from him, but he's got a long reach. People he knows, they keep tabs on me. That guy you saw the other night, he's one of them." Ezra's stomach twisted. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want to drag you into it," Caleb said, his voice raw. You're good, Ezra. You don't need my mess." Ezra reached across the table, his hand finding Caleb's. "I want your mess," he said fiercely. "I want you." Caleb's eyes glistened, and he squeezed Ezra's hand. "You don't know what you're signing up for." "Then tell me," Ezra urged. "Let me in." Caleb hesitated, then began to talk. His father was a powerful man in Chicago, tied to things Caleb wouldn't name businesses, deals, shadows. When Caleb came out at 18, his father's rejection was brutal, laced with threats. Caleb fled to Seattle, but the past followed. The man from Pioneer Square. The knocks on his door, they were reminders that he couldn't outrun his father's influence. Ezra listened, his heart aching. He wanted to fix it, to shield Caleb from the ghosts chasing him. But all he could do was hold Caleb's hand, anchoring him in the moment. They spent the next few days inseparable, as if time could erase the weight of Caleb's confession. They wandered Pike Place Market, tossing coins into buskers' hats, and kissed under the shadow of the Space Needle, the city's pulse matching their own. But the shadow lingered. Ezra caught Caleb checking his phone too often, his smiles fading when he thought Ezra wasn't watching. One night, as they lay in Caleb's bed, Ezra traced the scars on Caleb's arm. "What happened here?" he asked softly. Caleb tensed, then relaxed under Ezra's touch. "Bad decisions," he said. "Before I left Chicago, I wasn't in a good place." Ezra pressed a kiss to the scars, his lips lingering. "You're here now?" he whispered. "With me?" Caleb pulled him close, his breath shaky. "I don't want to lose this," he said, "but I'm scared I will." Ezra didn't have an answer, but he held Caleb tighter, as if he could keep the world at bay. But the world was closing in. The next morning, Ezra woke to find Caleb pacing, his phone clutched in his hand. "He's coming," Caleb said, his voice hollow. "My dad. He's coming to Seattle." Ezra's blood ran cold. "When?" "Tomorrow," Caleb said. "I don't know what he wants, but it's never good." Ezra stood, crossing to Caleb. "We'll face it together," he said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at him. Caleb looked at him, his eyes searching, and nodded. But Ezra saw the doubt there, the fear that this was a fight they couldn't win. The air in Caleb's apartment felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. Ezra sat on the couch, watching Caleb pack a small bag with jerky movements. "You don't have to face him alone," Ezra said, his voice firm. "I'm here." Caleb paused, his hands trembling as he zipped the bag. "You don't get it, Ezra. My dad doesn't just talk. He destroys." His voice cracked, and Ezra's heart twisted. He crossed the room, pulling Caleb into his arms. "Then let him try," Ezra said. "I'm not going anywhere." Caleb's laugh was bitter, but he leaned into Ezra, his forehead resting against Ezra's shoulder. "You're stubborn," he murmured. "Damn right," Ezra said, and they held each other until the tension eased, if only for a moment. The next day, they met Caleb's father at a sleek downtown hotel, the kind of place that reeked of money and power. Vincent Caldwell was a towering man, his gray suit immaculate, his eyes cold as steel. He barely acknowledged Ezra, his gaze fixed on Caleb. "You've been avoiding me," Vincent said, his voice smooth but laced with menace. Caleb stood tall, but Ezra saw the tremor in his hands. "I'm done running," Caleb said. "What do you want?" Vincent's smile was thin. "You owe me, Caleb. You don't get to walk away from family." Ezra's fists clenched, but Caleb's hand on his arm kept him grounded. "I don't owe you anything," Caleb said, his voice steady. "Not after what you did." Vincent's eyes narrowed, and the air crackled with tension. "Careful, son. You don't want to test me." Ezra stepped forward, his voice low. "He's not alone anymore." Vincent's gaze flicked to Ezra, dismissive. "This doesn't concern you." "It does," Ezra said, his heart pounding. "Because I love him." The words hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. Caleb's breath caught, and for a moment, the world was just the two of them. Vincent's laugh broke the spell, cold and sharp. "Love," he sneered. "You think that changes anything." But it did. Ezra saw it in Caleb's eyes, the spark of defiance, the flicker of hope. They left the hotel hand in hand, Vincent's threats echoing behind them. Caleb was quiet on the walk back, but his grip on Ezra's hand was fierce. That night, they sat on Caleb's balcony, the city sprawling below them. "You meant it," Caleb said, his voice soft. "What you said." Ezra nodded, his throat tight. "I've never been more sure of anything." Caleb's smile was small but real. "I love you too," he whispered, and the words felt like a lifeline. But Vincent wasn't done. The next morning, Ezra woke to a text from an unknown number. "Tell Caleb to meet me tonight. Alone. Or you'll both regret it." His blood ran cold. He showed Caleb, who paled but nodded. "I have to go," Caleb said. "If I don't, he'll come after you." "No," Ezra said, his voice fierce. "We do this together. Or not at all." Caleb's eyes searched his, and for the first time, Ezra saw trust there. They spent the day planning, piecing together what little Caleb knew about his father's world. Vincent's power came from control over people, over secrets. If they could expose him, they might break his hold. They met Vincent at a warehouse on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where shadows hid more than just dust. Vincent was waiting, flanked by two men who looked more like muscle than business partners. "You brought him," Vincent said, his eyes on Ezra. "Mistake." Caleb stepped forward, his voice steady. "This ends tonight. Dad. I'm not your pawn anymore." Vincent's smile was cold. "You think you can walk away? You're nothing without me." Ezra's heart pounded, but he stood beside Caleb, their shoulders touching. "He's everything," Ezra said, his voice unwavering. "And you can't take that away." The warehouse smelled of oil and rust, the air thick with tension. Vincent's men loomed behind him, their faces unreadable. Caleb's hand brushed Ezra's, a silent anchor in the storm. "You're making a mistake," Vincent said, his voice low, predatory. "You think you can defy me and walk away." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I already have." Vincent's laugh was a blade, sharp and cold. "You're weak, Caleb. Always were. And this." He gestured at Ezra, his lip curling. "This is just a distraction." Ezra's blood boiled, but Caleb's grip on his hand tightened, grounding him. "He's not a distraction," Caleb said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "He's why I'm still here." Vincent stepped closer, his presence suffocating. "You'll regret this," he said. "Both of you." Ezra's heart raced, but he didn't flinch. "We're not afraid of you," he said, the lie burning in his throat. He was terrified, but not for himself or Caleb, for the life they were trying to build. Vincent's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Ezra thought he'd strike. But then Caleb pulled out his phone, his hand steady. "You're not the only one with secrets, Dad," he said. "I've got proof mails, records, names, everything you've done. If anything happens to us, it goes public." Vincent froze, his face a mask of fury. "You wouldn't dare?" "Try me," Caleb said, his voice like steel. The standoff stretched, each second a lifetime. Finally, Vincent stepped back, his men shifting uneasily. "This isn't over," he said, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. He turned and left, his men following, the warehouse door slamming shut behind them. Ezra exhaled, his legs trembling. Caleb pulled him close, their foreheads touching. "You okay?" Caleb whispered. "No," Ezra admitted, his voice shaking. "But I'm here." Caleb's laugh was shaky but real. "You're insane," he said, "and I love you for it." They left the warehouse, the night air cool against their skin. Back at Caleb's apartment, they collapsed onto the couch, the adrenaline fading into exhaustion. Caleb's head rested on Ezra's shoulder, his breathing uneven. "I thought I'd lose you tonight," he said. Ezra tilted Caleb's chin up, meeting his eyes. "You won't," he said. "Not ever." They kissed, slow and deep, the world falling away. But the victory was fragile. Vincent's threat lingered, a shadow they couldn't outrun. Over the next few days, Caleb was jumpy, his eyes scanning every crowd. Ezra tried to keep things light, dragging Caleb to art galleries and food trucks. But the tension was a constant undercurrent. One afternoon, as they walked through a park, Caleb stopped short. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice low. "The stuff I have on my dad, it's not just business. It's personal. He hurt people, Ezra. People I cared about." Ezra's heart sank. "Who?" Caleb's eyes glistened. "My brother, Noah. He was like you, brave. Good. Dad, he broke him. Drove him away. I don't even know if he's alive." Ezra pulled Caleb into a hug, his own grief rising. He thought of his own family, the silence that had pushed him away. "We'll find him," Ezra said. "Together." Caleb nodded, but his eyes were haunted. That night, they started searching, scouring old social media, reaching out to Caleb's old contacts. It was a long shot, but it was something. Ezra saw the hope flicker in Caleb's eyes, and it fueled him. They were in this together, no matter what. But Vincent wasn't done. A week later, Ezra found an envelope slipped under his apartment door. Inside was a single photo of Caleb and Ezra kissing, taken from a distance. On the back, in sharp black ink, were the words, "You can't hide." Ezra's hands shook as he held the photo, the grainy image of their kiss burning into his mind. He called Caleb, his voice tight. "You need to see this." When Caleb arrived, his face paled at the sight of the photo. "He's watching us," Caleb said, his voice hollow. "He's always watching." Ezra's fear turned to anger. "We can't let him control us," he said. "We have to fight back." Caleb nodded, but his eyes were distant. "I thought I could keep you out of this," he said. "I was wrong." Ezra cupped Caleb's face, forcing him to meet his gaze. "I chose this," he said. "I chose you. We'll figure it out." They spent the night strategizing, their laptops open as they dug deeper into Vincent's world. Caleb's evidence was damning: financial records, coded messages, names of people tied to his father's dealings. But it wasn't enough. They needed more, something undeniable. Ezra suggested going public, but Caleb hesitated. "If we do this, there's no going back," he said. "He'll come for us." "He's already coming for us," Ezra said, pointing to the photo. "We don't have a choice." Caleb's resolve hardened. They reached out to a journalist, a friend of a friend who worked for a local paper. Her name was Lena, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s who listened to their story with quiet intensity. "This is big," she said, scanning Caleb's files. "But it's dangerous. You sure you're ready?" Caleb looked at Ezra, his hand finding his under the table. "We're ready," he said. Lena agreed to help, but she needed time to verify the information. In the meantime, Ezra and Caleb stayed vigilant, avoiding routines, changing routes. The city, once a haven, felt like a maze of threats. Every stranger's glance, every unexpected noise, set Ezra's nerves on edge. But Caleb's presence grounded him, their love a shield against the fear. One night, as they lay in bed, Caleb traced circles on Ezra's chest. "If this goes wrong," he said, "I want you to know you changed everything for me. You made me believe I could be more than my past." Ezra's throat tightened. "It won't go wrong," he said, but the words felt fragile. He pulled Caleb closer, their bodies tangled, their breaths sinking. In that moment, the world was just them, and it was enough. But the world wouldn't stay quiet. Lena called 2 days later, her voice urgent. "I've got something," she said. "A source who can corroborate your files. But we need to meet now." They met Lena at a crowded cafe. Her laptop open to a series of emails that tied Vincent to illegal dealings across state lines. The source, anonymous, had provided dates, names, transactions. It was enough to bring Vincent down if they could get it out before he struck. As they left the cafe, Ezra noticed a car idling across the street, its windows tinted. His heart sank. "Caleb," he whispered, nodding toward the car. Caleb's face tightened, but he kept walking, his hand gripping Ezra's. They didn't see the man following them until it was too late. He was one of Vincent's, his face familiar from the warehouse. He grabbed Caleb, pulling him into an alley before Ezra could react. "Stay out of this," the man growled, his grip bruising. Ezra didn't think. He lunged, tackling the man, his fist swinging. The fight was messy, desperate, but Caleb broke free, pulling Ezra away. They ran, their breaths ragged, until they reached Ezra's apartment. Inside, they locked the door, their bodies shaking. "He's not going to stop," Caleb said, his voice breaking. "Not until he gets what he wants." Ezra pulled him close, his own fear mirrored in Caleb's eyes. "Then we make sure he doesn't," he said. "We end this." The next morning, Ezra and Caleb met Lena at her office, a cramped space filled with stacks of papers and cold coffee. She'd been up all night, piecing together the story. "This goes live tomorrow," she said, her voice steady. "Once it's out, there's no turning back. You'll need to lay low?" Caleb nodded, his hand finding Ezra's under the table. "We're ready," he said, but Ezra saw the fear in his eyes. They both knew Vincent wouldn't go quietly. They spent the day tying up loose ends, moving to a friend's apartment in Queen and to avoid Vincent's men. Ezra packed light, his life distilled to a backpack and Caleb's hand in his. They didn't talk much, the weight of what was coming too heavy. But their touches, fingers brushing, shoulders leaning, said what words couldn't. That night, they sat on the apartment's tiny balcony, the city glittering below. Caleb's head rested on Ezra's shoulder, his voice soft. "I used to think I'd never escape him," he said. "But you made me believe I could." Ezra's heart ached. "You did that yourself," he said. "I just reminded you." Caleb's laugh was quiet, warm. "You're more than you think you are, Ezra." They kissed, the city fading into a blur of lights and sound. For a moment, they were untouchable, their love a fortress against the world. But the world was waiting. The story broke at dawn, a headline screaming across the local paper's website: "Chicago tycoon linked to criminal network." Lena's article was meticulous, damning, backed by Caleb's evidence and her source's testimony. Social media exploded, X posts amplifying the story, tearing into Vincent's empire. By noon, the FBI was involved, and Vincent's name was everywhere. Ezra and Caleb watched the news from their hideout, their hands clasped. "It's happening," Caleb whispered, his voice a mix of relief and dread. Ezra squeezed his hand, his own heart racing. They'd done it, but at what cost? Vincent's retaliation was swift. That afternoon, Lena called, her voice tense. "Someone broke into my office," she said. "They didn't take anything, but it's a warning. You need to get out of the city." Ezra's stomach dropped. "Where do we go?" he asked. "Anywhere but here," Lena said. "I'll keep you posted." They didn't have much time. Caleb's friend drove them to a bus station, where they bought tickets to Portland under fake names. The bus was crowded, the hum of conversation a strange comfort. Caleb leaned against Ezra, his eyes heavy. "I'm sorry," he whispered. For dragging you into this. Ezra tilted Caleb's chin up, meeting his gaze. I'd do it again, he said. Every second. Caleb's smile was fragile but real. They held each other as the bus rolled through the night, the highway stretching into the unknown. Ezra didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew they'd face it together. In Portland, they found a cheap motel, the kind with flickering neon signs and thin walls. They kept the curtains drawn, their world shrinking to the small, dim room. Caleb's phone buzzed with updates from Lena. Vincent had been arrested, his assets frozen. But the danger wasn't over. Vincent's men were still out there, and they were angry. Ezra and Caleb spent their days planning, their nights holding each other. They talked about the future dreams of a quiet life, maybe a house by the coast, where the world couldn't touch them. But the fear lingered, a shadow they couldn't shake. One night, as they lay in bed, Caleb's voice broke the silence. If we get through this, he said, I want to find Noah. I need to know he's okay. Ezra nodded, his hand tracing Caleb's back. We will, he said. I promise. The motel room in Portland felt like a cocoon, fragile but safe. Ezra and Caleb spent their days piecing together leads on Noah, Caleb's brother, scouring old emails and faded memories. Each dead end chipped away at Caleb's hope, but Ezra refused to let him give up. We'll find him, Ezra said, his voice a steady anchor. We've come this far. Weeks passed, the news of Vincent's downfall fading into the background. His empire crumbled under the weight of investigations. His men scattered. Lena's updates grew sparse, but the last one brought relief. Vincent was in custody, his influence shattered. Still, Ezra and Caleb stayed cautious, their lives a delicate balance of hope and vigilance. One evening, as they walked along the Willamette River, Caleb's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It's me. Noah. Caleb froze, his eyes wide. The message included an address in Eugene, a few hours away. He's alive, Caleb whispered, tears spilling over. Ezra pulled him close, his own relief overwhelming. Let's go, he said. Let's bring him home. They took a bus to Eugene the next morning, the ride quiet but charged with anticipation. The address led to a small house, its paint peeling but its windows warm with light. Caleb knocked, his hands trembling. The door opened, and there was Noah taller than Caleb, with the same green eyes but a face worn by years of running. The brothers embraced, their sobs breaking the silence. Ezra stood back, his heart full, giving them space. Noah's story spilled out over coffee at the kitchen table. He'd fled Chicago after Vincent's threats, living off the grid, haunted by the same shadows that chased Caleb. I thought you were gone, Caleb said, his voice thick. I thought I'd lost you. You didn't, Noah said, his hand on Caleb's shoulder. And you won't. Ezra watched them, the weight of their reunion settling over him. He thought of his own family, the distance he'd never bridged. Maybe one day, he thought. But for now, this was enough. They stayed in Eugene for a week, helping Noah rebuild his life. Caleb and Ezra found a rhythm, their love growing stronger in the quiet moments, cooking dinner, laughing over bad TV, stealing kisses in the morning light. The fear that had defined them began to fade, replaced by something new, possibility. When they returned to Seattle, the city felt different, like a place they could claim. They moved into a small apartment together, its walls bare but full of promise. Caleb's sketchbooks filled with new drawings, Ezra laughing, Noah's smile, the Seattle skyline at dusk. Ezra framed one, hanging it above their bed, a reminder of what they'd fought for. One night, as they stood at their door, Caleb's hand brushed Ezra's, echoing that first night. You took me home, Caleb said, his voice soft. And we didn't just say goodbye. Ezra smiled, his heart full. We never will, he said. They kissed, the city humming around them, their love a quiet rebellion against the world. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And in that moment, under the glow of a street lamp, they knew they'd built something unbreakably a home, a future, a love that could weather any storm. Their story wasn't just about surviving. It was about choosing to live, to love, despite the odds. Ezra and Caleb had faced fear, fought shadows, and found each other. And as they stood together, hand in hand, they knew the fight had been worth it. Because love, in all its messy, beautiful truth, was always worth it.